Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So glad to have everybody here. Very excited to have our special guest speaker. We're about halfway through this series for the year. Again, glad to always be bringing you experts in the field, not only people who have studied these topics from an academic lens, but people who are actually out there in the field doing this. So we have a special guest today, Korina Stark, and I'm very excited to have Korina here. She's the founding partner of Circular Spring, and one of the exciting things that I've come to know about this amazing woman is that she will say she's just going to talk about the surface or things like that, but when you dig in, she really knows, like, to the nth degree, so many things that we're just now discovering on the surface. So I'm very excited to have her here. We are going to have some Q&A after she presents, so if you just think you might forget your question, go ahead and throw it in the chat, and Shelby's going to be monitoring that. But I don't want to take any more time because Karina's got some great information for us today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Cassandra. Thank you, everybody. And let me get some slides up for us to take a peek at. All right. Okay, can everybody see this all right? Great. Okay. So the topic today is environmental health for economic resilience. And I have to tell you, it was really funny because to me when I first saw that, because oftentimes it's set up as a binary that you can only go after environmental health or you can only go after economic resilience. So I love that it is environmental health for economic resilience. That was near and dear to my heart. So I'm going to take you on a little journey today. First, I'm going to introduce you to one particular hat that I wear, which is as co-founder of Circular Spring. And we're a design and strategy firm, but we really focus on applying circular economy principles to the work that we do. And that really helps unlock innovation, collaboration, and allows people to get to more sustainable solutions in ways that they might not expect. And for those of you who are new to the concept of circular economy or have heard it be called a bunch of different things, uh, that's totally understandable. I love this particular article that talks about how there's all of these different definitions of what the circular economy is. And so here's how we like to think about it. It's really about these three goals. One is to prevent waste from even becoming waste at all. And then also doing things efficiently, with less so that there's less pollution as well as less waste. A second tenet is around making sure that the things that we do have, we can use for as long as possible. That if they break, we can fix them. And if we do need to take something to end of life, that the materials that it's made out of can be repurposed or recycled or reused in some way. And then the third tenet is around regeneration, which is, okay, how do we leave things a little bit better, or hopefully a lot better than how we found it? So applying that is often starts, like when we work with companies, it usually starts with a particular product. They have a particular widget or thing, and they want to either produce it more cheaply or with a more secure supply chain, et cetera, et cetera. And that's often where we start. And so you're probably using a computer or a phone to get on this Zoom call today. Well, that product is made out of a bunch of different metals and plastics that are sourced from different places. And you probably bought that computer from somebody, and when it breaks down, you might go back to that person to get it serviced. You might go somewhere else to get it serviced. Uh, but it's yours. Uh, Different business models might be a lease where Actually, you're just using the computer that you have for a while. You're paying a monthly fee, and then you give it back to them. But the third, so those are differences in business models. The ecosystem, though, starts to matter. And we're talking not about a natural ecosystem in this context, but who are all of the players? And just to make that clear, we're talking about where does the customer sit, service providers who can fix things if they're broken, for example, and how does waste management fit in? And two parts to this that I want to make clear is that how things and what things go into waste management is very location dependent. And the infrastructure that's available where you live really, really matters. They may or may not have the capability to process a certain kind of plastic, for example. Um, and so the ability for us to harness the materials from waste management and get them back into a supply chain so that they can then be turned into a product again, that is a lot of what we focus on, this whole holistic view when we look at circular economy problems, because that product exists within a greater context. And if we only look just at the product, we might be missing out on opportunities to reduce waste, increase, the length of time somebody can use something, or miss out on an opportunity to increase regeneration. So that's what we do. That's what I do sort of, by day. But I have another hat. We're going to talk about this other hat now. Here I am wearing a hat. And that is that I also am a small forest landowner. And our small bit of forest land is right here in the middle of Washington State. I live in Seattle, but our forest land is over here. And it is in one of our nation's fire sheds. And I don't know if anybody here has heard of what a fire shed is, but it's basically where there is an increased risk of fire and that fire damaging infrastructure and people's homes. And so this red dot, yeah, that is where the highest risk is, and that's where our land is. And this becomes really clear when you look at Washington as well, because it rains a lot on the west side and not so much on the east side. So our property here, it was logged before we got it, a bunch of it. But there's still a bunch of trees that were planted there that are going to have to get thinned, kind of like when you plant your garden, you plant a little row of peas or lettuce, and after a while you kind of have to pick a couple out so that the things aren't overcrowded. Well, you get to do the same thing at forest scale when you own forest land. If the trees are too close together, they're fighting for resources like sun and water and nutrients in the soil. So we knew that we were going to have to do some thinning activity, but also to help with forest health, but also for fire risk prevention as well. Now, when you do that, you end up with a whole bunch of biomass. And the term that is often used for the piles of it on your forest land is called slash. And the options you get to deal with the slash are typically the ones here on the right. There's a big wood chipper, and it goes into the wood chipper and it sprays it out. There's mastication. So we masticate our food when we chew our lunch, and there's these big machines that have kind of, sometimes it's a roller, sometimes it's a disc, but basically imagine the inside part of a blender that is really, really large, and it goes after the shrubs and mixes it all into small pieces, and then sometimes it often mixes up some of the top layer of the soil. So I wasn't a big fan of either of those first two, because as you recall, we're in this fire shed, and this would basically be taking a bunch of that biomass and turning it into kindling and then spreading it around. So that did not sound like a great option. And with the mastication, there's a soil disturbance, right? That's not so great for the soil. And also, there are some invasive species around, and I didn't want to just spread those seeds everywhere. That didn't sound like a great idea either. Hauling and dumping was not going to be cost effective for us. The nearest dump site for that type of material is really far away. And also, I work in circular economy. Why do I want to add to the waste stream? That seemed ridiculous. So the fourth option, which is super cost effective, is open pile burning. It's a standard practice. It's very, very typical. But there's some reasons I wasn't super keen on it. So here's a photograph from our property heading south, and I'm just going to zoom in. You see these large circles here? There's another one here. This is where there were some big open pile burns on the property. And here's what happens to the soil, which has a fair amount of clay in it. It basically turns into pottery. So you pick a glomp of this up and you knock on it and it sounds like you're knocking on a light brick. Uh, so not soil's not very happy with this. Also, fire shed, uh, really worried about fire escaping. And then the other reason is that a lot of small animals like making their homes in these piles when they're set to dry out. And I did not want to have roast chipmunk at the end of this. I love animals. I do eat them, but I do love animals. I don't know, I just didn't want to do it. The other thing is that open pile burns can generate a lot of smoke, and air quality is a big issue. Uh, when the burn season ends in Eastern Washington and people start burning their piles, the whole place smells like a campfire. Um, and there's a lot of complaints. People are calling in, oh, so and so's burning. And, so it's just from a community, you know, and civility standpoint, was not a big fan of this approach. That's when I started exploring biochar. For those of you who attended the last session with John, you got to hear a lot about biochar, and you're going to hear more about it today. Um, and I started looking at all of the different benefits that it could provide in addition to dealing with our slash. And one of the big things that people often ask about is, well, but if you're burning it, isn't it also going to release a bunch of emissions? And the answer is way, way, way less. So this is a reduction in methane. This is a reduction in carbon dioxide. This is the reduction in carbon monoxide. This is the reduction in nitrous. It's really significant. And so I was totally sold on this. The problem in Washington, and now this varies from state to state, so your results may vary, was that the very simple metal kilns, and you'll see a picture of this shortly, were being conflated with burn barrels, which are illegal in Washington. Burn barrels, if you're not familiar with them, imagine a 55 gallon drum, like an old oil drum, with a bunch of holes in the bottom to allow a bunch of air to come in and burn whatever is in there really quickly and turn it to ash as quickly as possible. Uh, they're illegal in Washington because oftentimes people put a bunch of things in there and try to burn things that probably shouldn't get burned, is part one. Part two is that the air intake from the bottom shoots flames and not completely burned things up into the atmosphere, including, sometimes hazardous chemicals, again, because sometimes people are putting stuff in there that probably shouldn't get burned. So there's a reason that they're illegal, but that's not what we're doing when we're making biochar. So the good news is the Washington Farm Forestry Association and a broad coalition of people got together to change the rules in Washington State and make it legal for us to use flame cap kilns. It was a big deal. This happened last year in the spring, but now we can do it. There's some other things we're working on as well. But in most areas, for forestry in particular, this is not a problem to do anymore, which is great. And so, as quickly as possible, we wanted to get the word out and demonstrate that this was possible. I'm just going to show you a little bit about what that looks like. Here's a very, very small slash pile that's only about 15 feet wide. Larger slash piles are more the size of my house and as long as a city block. And we've prepped some of that biomass from smaller to wider and kept it dry. And that's just for the starter load. And here we are assembling a kiln. And we've got people from the local conservation district, from the fire district, from a bunch of different agencies participating in this. So, because nobody had really done this, very few people had done this locally. Now we've got it assembled, we've got it loaded with the first batch. And so this is about 7.5 feet wide, not quite 4 feet tall. And we kept on filling this up as we were processing it. And so we are able to deal with, so that slash pile I showed you earlier, we were able to process in not a complete day, probably about 3 to 4 times that amount. So here we are in the middle of the burn, and as you can see a little bit of flame here, but you can't really see much smoke. You can see this illustrated even more here. Here's this beautiful, clean, clear flame here, and tiny little puff of smoke. So when we talk about, hey, it's way less smoke, we're not kidding. And part of that is because there's these wonderful countercurrents that start to happen and they're burning off the volatiles and they're burning the particulate. And so what happens is that the amount of emissions, like I showed you in those graphs that go out, are way, way, way less. And because the sides are there and there's a dirt seal on the bottom, no oxygen is getting in. What that means is that as the carbon gets released, there's no oxygen to party with and make carbon dioxide. The carbon is there looking at other carbon atoms saying, well, I guess you're here, so let's create a really durable form of carbon. It's 6 carbon atoms together, uh, and it becomes this really stable, durable form of carbon. Here we are when we've just started to open up the kiln and we're quenching it and raking it out. And here's the finished biochar that we made. And this is just in a couple hours. And this is what we could use as a soil amendment. And especially on the forest floor, it really, really helps with water retention. And I'll show you an example of that shortly. Rousing success. We've done additional workshops. You know, last year we're doing more this spring, but it was a really, really wonderful experience. And about 4 months later, I went back to the same spot. Now we've got there's a plant that grows there called mullein, and you saw that sort of ring of black biochar that we just sort of spread out. We didn't really do much of anything to it. Um, and a couple feet away from that, this is about the size of one of the mullein plants about 4 months later. I'm going to show you two more plants, this one and this one. And you see the black underneath it? These were coming out of where the biochar was. This is very different than that clay brick that you might have seen earlier. And you can see how much larger they are than the ones that were a couple feet away. If we take a look at this, we can sort of see that, they were a lot bigger. And in that dry area of Eastern Washington, being able to add that much moisture availability to the plants is a big deal. Now we know that it does a bunch of other things too, but even for that alone, smoke, water, pretty good. So I know that there's the personal reasons that I have for loving biochar, but it did, if you're looking at carbon removal, biochar is the method that is actually delivering on the carbon. Um, there's a bunch of pre-purchase agreements for other types of carbon removal, but biochar is what is getting it done. This is this is number for 2023. It's in the 80s for 2024. And there's a report that just came out. There's a website that I'm a huge fan of called CDR.FYI, and they just published their 2024 report. And you can see just, how, what's going on with carbon dioxide removal. Uh, if you're interested in doing getting credits for biochar, there are different what are called MRVs and certifications. And MRV is measurement, reporting, and verification. And these are the steps that you need to go through to make sure that you know how much carbon you're actually removing. And there's various protocols. And the one from the Climate Action Reserve is one of the newer ones. This will come up later. Um, and these entities have different MRVs for different production methods, different geolocations, etc. So depending on what you're doing, you might want to use one protocol or another protocol, or a particular protocol might only apply to a particular geographic area. So, for example, one that we're going to be using soon only applies to to Canada and the United States. Anyway, with all of that backdrop of, okay, wow, we have this approach that can help us get carbon back into the ground. It reduces fire risk. It's low smoke, has all of these benefits. How do we do more of this? Well, so this is the point in the story where my professional life working in the circular economy and my more sort of private life around loving forests and wanting to see them not get burned to the ground came together. There was a grant proposal put out by the Forest Service, and what they were trying to do is to get more small forest landowners. I resemble that, right? To participate in these emerging private markets. Uh, and part of the reason they wanted to do that is for forest resilience. And so, what a wonderful way to look at an entire ecosystem of both natural ecosystems and economic ecosystems and bring them together. And so it really felt like, okay, great. I get to use these ways of thinking and apply them in a passion area. So it was a complete gift. So we put together a project. And this project is really trying to see, hey, can we use these carbon credits using this new protocol that seems to be really a good fit for the production methods that we're talking about as a way to create a a funding loop, perpetual funding loop that will help make it easier for small forest landowners to do a bunch of these forest health projects, make sure that they are more fire resilient, and you know gather money from these credits to get people to do the thinning projects, to create the biochar, to help the soil, to get the money to, and just make this happen. Um, and we got it, which is great. And so we've got many questions that we're trying to answer with this. We're trying to answer, hey, can we get small forest landowners in Washington for whom this is a new practice? This is a new tool in the toolkit to participate. Can we train people on how to do this? Can we produce a good amount of biochar at a high quality that will get accepted by the registry And will the revenue that we generate from it actually help us fund more of this good work? And I bring up the revenue part of this, right? Because there, the jury's out on whether or not all of the administration, measurement, et cetera, that we're going to need to do, there's a cost to do that. It doesn't come for free. And so are we going to be able to generate enough revenue from these credits to offset those costs? We don't know. And that's part of the reason why we are doing this is that there's been a lot of conjecture about, hey, well, you want to fund this, you're making biochar, why don't you use carbon credits? Um, my observation so far is that relying on carbon credits alone is not going to be able to fund these efforts. However, as a piece of a multifaceted puzzle and diversified revenue streams, I think it is a wonderful way for us to augment those. At any rate, the grant award was in December, so we are getting this project, going right now, and we'll be doing. It's a 3-year project, so I'm not going to have results in springtime. But these are some of the questions that we have that we're hoping to answer. And one of the things that I'm really excited about is that even if we only accomplish some of them, we will have taught people some really wonderful restorative practices to use on their land. We'll have trained people up to be able to deliver services that can create more revenue streams in and more economic prosperity in an area that is more economically depressed in the eastern side of the state. So there'll be a lot of positive good done to that, both economic and ecological ecosystem in the area. So I kind of think of this as the Do No Harm project. Uh, you may have seen the news over the past couple weeks that there have been a couple hiccups with federal funding. Um, but there are other ways that we can do this as well, and that we are actively pursuing to do and scale this work. And a big one, you heard from John during the last session, is that we just have a placeholder there right now, but we're working on a more robust offering at biocharonSite.org to help with a lot of these same efforts, training, education, connecting people to resources, um, and providing guidance when it comes to permitting pathways, et cetera. Again, to help raise the knowledge level and to normalize this practice much more broadly, to be able to add it as something that people can do as a service that they can provide and get paid for. And so again, going into a bunch of the same types of a creation of assets and capabilities within a broader area than the grant will be able to offer. At any rate, if you want to get in touch with me, that's easy to do, and we'll be sending this out later. Uh, you can contact me on LinkedIn. You can find me at my email address. But that's a story about how these two worlds have come together.